You are not going to be attacked first by strangers. You're going to be targeted by the people living 10 feet from you. Let that sink in, because during major U.S. blackouts, the FBI and FEMA have both documented that most crimes aren't committed by outsiders. They're committed by locals who already know exactly who has food, who has power, and who is prepared. After the 2021 Texas grid failure, emergency theft reports showed that a huge percentage of break-ins happened within the same neighborhood radius, not across town. And here's the nightmare. In blackouts lasting longer than 72 hours, researchers have recorded a 300% plus spike in property crime. And the first targets are always the homes that look stable, quiet, or too ready. Because when the lights stay off, your neighbors stop being neighbors. They become desperate humans doing math in their head. Who has water? Who has heat? Who has supplies? So if you think danger comes from some random looter, you're already behind. Here are the 7 blackout signs your neighbors are not on your side. Starting with number 7. Number 7. The friendly inventory. Trap. When curiosity becomes a threat, let me tell you something most people don't realize until it's too late. Your neighbors don't need to break into your house to figure out what you have. They just need to talk to you. In a blackout, one of the first signs your neighbors are not on your side is when their friendliness suddenly turns into inventory gathering. And it happens fast. Day 1, it's casual. Hey, you doing okay? Day 2, it becomes, do you have any batteries? Day 3, it's, what are you using for water? That's not small talk. That's reconnaissance. Disaster sociologists actually have a term for this, resource probing, and it spikes dramatically during extended outages. After the 2010 Chile blackout, researchers documented that social conversations shifted towards supply tracking within just 48 hours. And here's the scary part. Most people give away information without even realizing it. They mention they have a generator. They joke about having canned food. They casually say, we stocked up last month. Congratulations. You've just painted a target on yourself. FEMA's behavioral crisis reports show that in high-stress disasters, perceived resource imbalance becomes one of the strongest triggers for interpersonal aggression, stronger than hunger itself in some cases, because it's not just desperation, it's resentment. Your neighbor doesn't just want food, they want fairness. And fairness, in their mind, becomes taking what you shouldn't have. In the 1977 blackout in New York City, many confrontations started with neighbors simply knowing too much about who had what. The ones who were left alone weren't the richest, they were the most silent. This is why the friendly inventory trap is so dangerous. The neighbor who keeps asking questions isn't just anxious, they're building a mental map. Who has flashlights? Who has water? Who has medical supplies? And when the blackout stretches past 72 hours, when grocery shelves are bare and the water pressure drops, those mental maps become action plans. Your job is to stay vague, stay neutral, stay unremarkable. Because the moment your neighbor starts counting your supplies in their head, you are no longer a neighbor. You are a solution to their problem. Number 6. The quiet coalition signal. When neighbors start grouping without you. Here's one that most people completely miss until the tension is already boiling. When the blackout hits day 4 or 5, you'll start noticing something subtle. Neighbors stop acting like individuals and start acting like a unit. That's sign number 6. Your neighbors are not on your side, the quiet formation of small coalitions. And this is where things get dangerous, because humans don't become brave alone. They become brave in groups. Sociologists studying disaster behavior call this emergent grouping. And it happens in almost every prolonged crisis. It sounds harmless at first, people gathering outside, sharing updates, talking about community safety. But here's the truth. The moment neighbors begin meeting without you, they're not bonding, they're aligning, and alignment creates power. After Hurricane Katrina, one of the most documented patterns wasn't looting by strangers, it was neighborhood groups deciding who was helpful and who was hoarding. In blackouts, social order doesn't disappear, it mutates. People start creating informal leadership structures, and those structures often turn into entitlement. You'll hear phrases like, we need to make sure everyone contributes. Or worse, some people have more than others. That's not cooperation, that's pressure. And FEMA's own post-disaster conflict studies have shown that groups under survival stress begin enforcing fairness through coercion as early as day 5, especially when food and power are unevenly distributed. In Argentina's 2019 mass outages, community groups in certain districts began monitoring households they suspected had generators, and multiple reports surfaced of forced sharing. That's what a coalition becomes when hunger enters the room. The scary part is you might not even be doing anything wrong. You might simply be quiet, private, prepared. And in a blackout, privacy looks like guilt. Groups hate unknowns. A neighborhood coalition doesn't want uncertainty. It wants control. And if they can't control the grid, they'll try to control each other. So if you notice neighbors suddenly clustering, whispering, organizing check-ins, pay attention. Because once group psychology takes over, it stops being about survival. It becomes about enforcement. And enforcement always finds a target. Number 5. The helper who keeps returning. Charity that turns into surveillance. Now sign number 5 is one of the most deceptive because it comes wrapped in kindness. It's the neighbor who keeps offering help over and over again. At first, it feels comforting. Hey, I'm just checking on you. Need anything? We're all in this together. But here's the truth most people don't want to admit. In prolonged blackouts, repeated generosity can become a form of surveillance. It's not always altruism, sometimes it's positioning. After major grid failures, crisis psychologists have observed a pattern called dependency fishing, where individuals repeatedly insert themselves into others' lives to assess weakness, resources, and compliance. In other words, they're not helping to be nice, they're helping to see what you have, how stable you are, and how likely you are to fold under pressure. And this is extremely common when supply chains collapse. During the Texas freeze blackout of 2021, mutual aid was real, but so was exploitation. Community reports showed that some individuals offered help early, only to later demand access to food, fuel, or shelter once desperation peaked, because the helper remembers what they gave you. And in their mind, that becomes leverage. The blackout changes social math. Every candle, every battery, every bottle of water becomes currency. And the neighbor who keeps stopping by isn't just being friendly, they're establishing a relationship they can cash in later. Worse, frequent visits allow them to observe patterns. Do you have light inside? Do you smell cooking? Do you look too calm? In intelligence terms, they're collecting indicators. And when blackouts last beyond a week, those indicators determine who becomes a target. The neighbor who just wants to help might be the same one telling others, they seem fine. They must have supplies. That's how you get surrounded without warning. This is why experienced preppers always say, in a blackout, overvisibility is vulnerability. You can be polite. You can be humane. But you must stay operationally quiet. Because number 5 isn't the neighbor who hates you. It's the neighbor who watches you too closely under the mask of care. And remember, this is only sign 5. We are not even near the most dangerous ones yet. Number 4. The sudden rule maker. Neighbor. When someone tries to control the block. All right, listen closely, because sign number 4 is one of the most overlooked and one of the most dangerous. It's the neighbor who suddenly starts acting like the blackout gave them a promotion. You know exactly who I mean. The person who, under normal life, might have been slightly nosy or overly involved in HOA nonsense, but now that the grid is down and police response is delayed and nobody knows what tomorrow looks like, they step into a new role. The neighborhood authority. And this is a massive warning sign, because history shows that in crisis situations, power vacuums get filled fast not by heroes, but by control seekers. Researchers studying disaster zones call this informal dominance emergence, and it spikes when normal systems collapse. In the 2003 Northeast blackout, multiple community reports documented residents forming block leadership groups within just 3 days, often led by individuals with no real expertise, only loud confidence. And here's the problem. These people don't organize for safety. They organize for control. They start suggesting rules. Nobody should be using generators after dark. We need to pool food. Everyone should check in with the group. Sounds reasonable, right? Wrong. Because what they're really doing is building a surveillance net. They want to know who has what, who is cooperating, who is independent. And independence is threatening. In prolonged outages, group psychology shifts fast. People stop valuing privacy and start valuing compliance. FEMA conflict assessments have shown that neighborhoods under resource strain often develop coercive fairness enforcement, meaning those perceived as having more become pressured, guilted, or even confronted. The rule-maker neighbor is usually the spark. They frame it as community survival. But what they're really doing is positioning themselves as the gatekeeper of morality. Who deserves help? Who deserves scrutiny? Who deserves punishment? And once that social structure forms, it becomes incredibly hard to escape. Because now you're not dealing with one desperate person. You're dealing with a self-appointed committee. This is how neighbor-on-neighbor escalation begins, not with theft, but with control. If you hear someone saying, "We need to make sure everyone is doing their part," you need to understand what comes next. Pressure, then resentment, then enforcement. In blackouts longer than a week, the biggest danger isn't the darkness. It's the neighbor who thinks the darkness gives them authority over you. Number 3, the resource witness problem. When your neighbors start watching what you consume. Now sign number 3 is where things turn quietly predatory. This is when your neighbors begin monitoring your consumption, not directly, not openly, but through observation. And most people have no idea it's happening until the social temperature has already shifted. Let me explain. In a blackout, resources become visible in ways they never were before. Smells travel farther because there's no ambient noise. Light becomes a beacon because every street is dark. Cooking becomes a signal. Even trash becomes intelligence. And the moment your neighbors start noticing that you're eating, cooking, charging devices, or staying warmer than everyone else, you've entered what survival analysts call consumption visibility risk. This is real. After the Fukushima disaster in 2011, neighborhoods experiencing prolonged shortages saw an increase in what researchers described as peer resource scrutiny, where households began informally tracking which families were doing too well. And why does this happen? Because humans don't just panic from hunger, they panic from unfairness. If they believe you have access to something they don't, their brain doesn't interpret it as preparation. It interprets it as injustice. That's when resentment becomes rationalization. They should share. They must be hiding something. They're selfish. In the 1977 NYC blackout, some of the most intense confrontations didn't start with strangers breaking in. They started with neighbors who noticed signs of comfort. A warm window, the smell of food, someone using batteries too freely. That's why number 3 is so dangerous, because it's passive at first. It's just watching. But watching turns into talking. Talking turns into labeling. Labeling turns into targeting. And the scary thing is, you don't even need to be rich in supplies. You just need to appear stable. In disaster criminology, stability is a provocation, because desperation doesn't want to see calm. It wants to equalize. So if your neighbors start making comments like, "Wow, you guys seem to be doing okay," or "Smells like someone's eating good," that is not harmless. That's a probe. That's awareness forming. In a blackout, awareness spreads faster than fire, and once people believe you have resources, you become part of their mental survival equation. Number 3 is the moment you stop being invisible. And invisibility is the safest thing you can be when the lights stay off. Number 2, the desperation flip. When neighbors stop asking and start expecting. Now listen, because sign number 2 is where the entire neighborhood dynamic crosses a line most people don't even recognize until it's already happened. This is the moment your neighbors stop treating help as a request and start treating it as an obligation. At first, during the early blackout days, people ask politely, "Do you have an extra candle? Any bottled water?" But once the outage drags on, once refrigeration fails, once gas stations stop pumping, once the ATMs go dark, that polite layer evaporates, and what replaces it is expectation. This is where survival psychology becomes brutal. Researchers call it entitlement under scarcity, and it's one of the most consistent patterns across every long-term disaster zone ever studied. When human beings feel trapped, powerless, and deprived, their brains shift from cooperation to extraction. They stop thinking, "Can you help me?" and start thinking, "You should help me." During the Soviet collapse in the early 1990s, neighborhoods experiencing food shortages reported a sharp rise in forced mutual aid, meaning people weren't sharing willingly anymore, they were sharing because refusal became dangerous. And we've seen modern versions of this. After Hurricane Maria, aid workers documented cases of neighbors confronting other households with demands like, "We know you have supplies." Not asking, demanding. Because desperation doesn't stay passive, it becomes moral. In their mind, your preparedness becomes selfishness, and selfishness becomes justification. FEMA's post-disaster behavioral breakdown reports show that once shortages extend beyond 5 to 7 days, social conflict rises fastest, not from outsiders, but from perceived unfairness between people in close proximity. And neighbors are the closest proximity of all. This is why number 2 is so chilling. You'll feel it in the tone shift. They stop saying if you can. They start saying you should. They start keeping score. We helped you earlier. We're all struggling. Don't be like that. Emotional manipulation becomes the weapon long before violence does. And once expectation takes root, refusal becomes an insult. An insult becomes anger. Anger becomes action. This is the point where a blackout stops being inconvenient and starts becoming socially predatory. Because now you're not dealing with a neighbor asking for help. You're dealing with a neighbor who believes your supplies belong to the block. Number 2 is the flip from community to pressure. And once it happens, you have officially become a resource node, not a person. Number 1, the moment they stop seeing you as a neighbor and start seeing you as a supply source. All right, here we are. Number 1, and I need you to understand something clearly. This is the most dangerous sign of all, because it's not about words, it's about perception. The number 1 blackout sign your neighbors are not on your side is when they stop seeing you as a fellow survivor and start seeing you as inventory. This is the psychological point of no return. In normal life, neighbors are people. They have names, routines, personalities. But in prolonged grid-down conditions, the human brain starts simplifying the world into survival categories: threat, asset, obstacle, resource. And once you become categorized as a resource, empathy drops fast. Disaster researchers have documented this in famine zones, war zones, and urban collapse scenarios for decades. It's called objectification under scarcity, and it's terrifyingly reliable. In the Bosnian sieges of the 1990s, survivors wrote about how community bonds didn't always break with violence. First, they broke with mental reframing. That family has food. That house has heat. That man has medicine. People stopped being neighbors. They became supply containers. And once that shift happens, morality becomes negotiable. That's why number 1 is the most lethal. You'll notice it in the eyes, the quiet watching, the repeated presence near your home, the way conversations become transactional, the way your well-being irritates them, because your survival becomes evidence that they are failing. And the human brain cannot tolerate unfairness during deprivation. In extended blackouts, especially beyond 10 days, criminologists have found that interpersonal violence increases most sharply in areas where resource inequality is visible, even at small levels. One home cooking while others starve is enough. One house warm while others freeze is enough. Once they see you as a supply source, the calculation changes. Breaking into your home doesn't feel like crime anymore. It feels like redistribution. It feels like justice. And that is what makes it so dangerous. The true threat in a blackout is not the stranger in the dark. It's the person who knows your name, knows your layout, knows your habits, and has decided quietly that what you have should be theirs. Number 1 is when neighbor becomes predator. And at that point, the blackout isn't just a power outage. It's the collapse of the social contract right outside your front door.